There's a conversation happening right now that you're not invited to. It's taking place behind your back, in boardrooms you'll never enter, at dinner tables where your name becomes currency. And the most disturbing part isn't that you're being discussed. It's that you have no idea how expertly you're being positioned, categorized, and ultimately controlled by people who've mastered something you've never even recognized exists: the silent mind game. A psychological chess match where the pieces move without sound, where influence flows like water through cracks you can't see, where power shifts hands before you realize the game has even begun. And while you're focused on what people say, the true players are orchestrating what people think, feel, and ultimately do. Machiavelli didn't just write about political strategy. He decoded the invisible architecture of human manipulation, the systematic way certain individuals bend reality to their will without ever raising their voice, without ever making a threat, without ever revealing their hand until the game is already over. These are the elite manipulators, not the obvious ones, not the loud ones, the silent ones who understand that the mind is the ultimate battlefield. And here's what's terrifying. You encounter these people every single day. They're in your workplace, your social circles, maybe even your family. They smile when they speak to you. They remember your birthday. They ask about your weekend. But behind that pleasant facade, they're running calculations you can't see, building psychological profiles you're unaware of, positioning themselves 3 moves ahead while you're still figuring out the rules of the game they're playing. The difference between someone who gets manipulated and someone who never does isn't intelligence. It's not education. It's not even experience. It's awareness. Awareness of the game itself. Because once you understand how the silent mind game works, once you can see the invisible threads being pulled, you stop being a piece on someone else's board. You become a player, but most people will never see it. They'll spend their entire lives reacting to moves they don't understand, wondering why certain people always seem to get what they want, why some individuals effortlessly command respect while others beg for attention, why particular personalities can walk into any room and somehow reshape the entire dynamic without saying a word. The answer lies in something Machiavelli understood centuries ago. The human mind isn't rational. It's predictable. And once you know the patterns, once you understand the psychological triggers that drive human behavior, you can influence outcomes without anyone realizing they're being influenced. You can plant ideas that people think are their own. You can create desires they believe originated from within. You can guide decisions while letting others think they're in complete control. This is the silent mind game. And the people who've mastered it operate on a level most can't even perceive. They don't argue with you. They don't try to convince you. They simply arrange circumstances so that the conclusion they want becomes the only logical choice you can make. They don't force compliance. They engineer consent. They don't demand loyalty. They cultivate dependency. Watch how they move through the world. They listen more than they speak. They ask questions that reveal far more than they answer. They offer solutions to problems you didn't know you had. They make themselves indispensable in ways that feel natural, even welcome. And by the time you realize how much influence they've gained, you're already invested in maintaining the dynamic they've created. The silent manipulator doesn't need to be liked by everyone. They only need to be essential to the right people. They don't seek attention. They seek leverage. They don't broadcast their victories. They let their results speak in whispers that somehow echo louder than any announcement ever could. And here's the part that will disturb you the most. Some of your most important life decisions, the ones you're most proud of, the ones you think define who you are, may not have been entirely your own. That job you took, that relationship you ended, that investment you made, that person you cut out of your life. How certain are you that these choices emerged purely from your own judgment? How confident are you that no one else's invisible influence shaped the path that led you to those decisions? The elite manipulators understand something about human nature that most people refuse to accept. We don't make decisions based on logic. We make them based on emotion, then use logic to justify what we've already chosen to believe. And if you can control the emotional landscape, if you can subtly shift how someone feels about their options, you can guide their choices without them ever knowing they're being guided. They know that people don't want to be told what to think. They want to discover the truth for themselves. So instead of offering conclusions, they provide carefully selected information that leads to only one reasonable outcome. Instead of giving orders, they create situations where compliance becomes the path of least resistance. Instead of demanding change, they make the status quo uncomfortable enough that transformation feels like relief. This is psychological architecture, the systematic construction of mental environments where certain thoughts flourish while others cannot survive, where specific emotions get amplified while others get muted, where particular behaviors become inevitable while alternatives seem increasingly unrealistic. The masters of this game don't see people as individuals. They see patterns, psychological profiles, predictable responses to specific stimuli. They understand that underneath all our complexity, all our uniqueness, all our personal stories, human beings operate according to surprisingly consistent rules. Fear motivates more powerfully than hope. Scarcity creates more desire than abundance. The need to belong overrides almost every other consideration. And once you recognize these patterns in yourself, once you see how your own mind responds to certain triggers, you begin to notice when someone else is pulling those same triggers. You start to feel the invisible pressure of carefully applied psychological leverage. You begin to sense when you're being positioned, when your emotions are being managed, when your decisions are being engineered. But awareness alone isn't enough. Because the silent mind game isn't just about defense. It's about offense. It's about understanding that in a world where everyone is trying to influence everyone else, the people who don't learn these skills don't get to opt out. They just get to be victims. They become the ones who wonder why life happens to them instead of for them. They remain puzzled by their own lack of influence, while others seem to effortlessly shape the world around them. The truth is, influence is not optional. You're either influencing or being influenced. You're either playing the game or being played. You're either aware of the psychological dynamics at work in every interaction, or you're unconsciously responding to manipulation you can't see. There is no neutral position. There is no sitting this one out. So the question isn't whether you should learn the silent mind game. The question is whether you'll learn it consciously and deliberately, or whether you'll stumble through life as an unwitting participant in games you don't understand, making moves that serve other people's strategies while believing you're acting in your own best interest. The elite manipulators that Machiavelli would recognize today aren't the ones making headlines. They're the ones writing them. They're not the faces you see. They're the voices you hear echoing in your own thoughts long after the conversation has ended. They're not trying to control what you do. They're focused on something far more powerful. They're shaping who you become. And this is where most people make their fatal mistake. They assume manipulation requires deception. They think influence means lying, scheming, or tricking people into doing things against their will. But the masters of the silent mind game understand something far more sophisticated. The most powerful manipulation doesn't feel like manipulation at all. It feels like enlightenment. They don't lie to you. They simply emphasize certain truths while allowing others to fade into the background. They don't force you to change your mind. They create experiences that make changing your mind feel inevitable. They don't steal your power. They convince you to hand it over willingly, gratefully, as if you're receiving a gift. Watch how they operate in meetings. While others argue about details, they control the frame. They don't debate whether the proposal is good or bad. They subtly shift the conversation to assume the proposal is necessary, then guide the discussion toward which version should be implemented. By the time anyone realizes what happened, the fundamental decision has already been made without ever being explicitly discussed. This is frame control. The ability to determine not just what people think about, but how they think about it. Most people focus on winning individual battles. The silent manipulator designs the entire war. They don't care if you disagree with their position. They care that you're arguing within their framework, using their definitions, accepting their premises as the foundation for the debate. They understand that whoever sets the context controls the outcome. If they can make you argue about which solution is best, you've already agreed that a solution is needed. If they can get you to discuss how to implement their plan, you've already accepted that their plan will be implemented. If they can frame the conversation around timing, you've already conceded that the event will happen. But here's what makes them truly dangerous. They don't just manipulate in the moment. They manipulate across time. They plant seeds in conversations that won't sprout for weeks or months. They create psychological foundations that will support structures they haven't even begun building yet. They invest in your emotional landscape, like a farmer preparing soil for crops that won't be planted until next season. This is long-term psychological positioning. While you're focused on immediate interactions, they're orchestrating campaigns that unfold over years. That casual comment about your potential dropped seemingly without purpose 3 months ago. That small favor they did for you, never mentioned again but somehow still lingering in your memory. That moment when they defended you in a conversation you weren't supposed to know about. None of these were accidents. All were deposits in an account they plan to withdraw from when the time is right. They study your patterns with the patience of a scientist. How you respond to stress. What makes you defensive? Which compliments land deepest? What fears keep you awake at night? Which dreams make you take risks? They don't judge these patterns. They map them. They don't criticize your vulnerabilities. They catalog them. Because to the silent manipulator, understanding you isn't about connection. It's about leverage. And they're collecting this intelligence constantly, invisibly, through methods you'd never suspect. The questions they ask during casual conversations, the way they listen when you complain about other people, how they respond when you share your successes and failures. They're not just being friendly. They're conducting psychological reconnaissance, gathering data they'll use to predict and influence your future behavior. This is why they remember details about your life that even you've forgotten. Not because they care deeply about your childhood pet or your college roommate, but because these details are pieces of a psychological puzzle they're assembling. Each memory they store becomes a potential key to unlock your cooperation later. Each personal story you share becomes ammunition they can use to trigger specific emotional responses when they need them. The most skilled practitioners of this game don't even need to be present to influence you. They've trained you to hear their voice in your own thoughts. When you're making decisions, you find yourself considering what they would think. When you're evaluating options, their perspective somehow becomes part of your internal dialogue. They've achieved the ultimate form of influence. They've become a permanent resident in your mind. This is psychological programming. Not the dramatic, obvious kind you see in movies. The subtle, sophisticated kind that works by making you feel like you're thinking more clearly, not less. They don't implant foreign thoughts. They amplify existing ones that serve their purposes while gradually diminishing those that don't. They don't change who you are. They nurture the version of you that's most useful to them. And the most disturbing part is how good it feels. When someone truly masters the silent mind game, being influenced by them doesn't feel like manipulation. It feels like clarity. It feels like someone finally understands you. It feels like you're becoming the person you were always meant to be. The psychological chains they place around you feel like wings. They've learned to weaponize your own growth. Every positive change you make, every goal you achieve, every breakthrough you experience becomes evidence that their influence is beneficial. You start to associate your success with their presence in your life. You begin to credit them not just for specific help, but for the entire trajectory of your improvement. Without realizing it, you become invested in proving that their influence over you is a good thing. This creates a psychological trap more powerful than any external force, because now you're not just complying with their wishes, you're defending their right to influence you. You're arguing against your own independence. You're volunteering to remain under their psychological control because you've been convinced that this control is actually freedom. The elite manipulator doesn't need to imprison you. They convince you that the prison is a palace. They don't need to force your compliance. They make compliance feel like rebellion against a world that doesn't understand your potential the way they do. They don't need to isolate you from other influences. They make other influences seem inferior, shallow, or actively harmful to your growth. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of their mastery is how they maintain plausible deniability, even to themselves. Many of the most effective practitioners of the silent mind game genuinely believe they're helping people. They've rationalized their manipulation as mentorship, their control as guidance, their psychological exploitation as emotional support. They sleep peacefully at night, convinced that their influence is benevolent, even as they systematically harvest psychological compliance from everyone around them. This self-deception makes them even more dangerous. Because when someone truly believes they're acting in your best interest while they manipulate you, their influence carries the weight of authentic conviction. They're not performing concern. They feel it. They're not faking wisdom. They believe it. And this genuine emotion makes their manipulation nearly impossible to detect and almost impossible to resist. Now you understand why detection is so difficult. How do you recognize manipulation when it's delivered with genuine care? How do you resist influence when it's packaged as wisdom? How do you maintain independence when dependence feels like growth? The answer lies not in becoming paranoid or cynical, but in developing something far more sophisticated. Emotional sovereignty. The person who cannot be silently manipulated isn't the one who trusts no one. It's the one who trusts themselves first. They've learned to distinguish between influence that serves their authentic development and influence that serves someone else's agenda, disguised as their development. They can feel the difference between genuine guidance and psychological positioning, not through suspicion, but through clarity about their own values, goals, and decision-making processes. This requires a level of self-awareness that most people never develop. You must know your own mind well enough to recognize when someone else is operating it. You must understand your emotional patterns well enough to notice when they're being deliberately triggered. You must be so clear about your authentic desires that you can sense when artificial ones are being implanted. The masters of this game count on your lack of self-knowledge. They exploit the gap between who you think you are and who you actually are. They use your blind spots as entry points. They leverage your unexamined beliefs as control mechanisms. The more unconscious you are about your own psychology, the more vulnerable you become to their manipulation. But once you close these gaps, once you develop genuine self-awareness, something remarkable happens. You stop being a target, not because you become hostile or defensive, but because you become unmanipulatable. You can engage with these individuals, learn from them when appropriate, even maintain relationships with them without falling under their psychological control. You begin to see their techniques with crystal clarity, the careful timing of their suggestions, the strategic use of your own words against you, the way they position themselves as the solution to problems they helped create, the subtle pressure they apply through social dynamics, the emotional buttons they push with surgical precision. None of it surprises you anymore because you understand the game they're playing, and here's where you face a choice that will define the rest of your life. Once you can see the silent mind game clearly, once you understand how psychological manipulation actually works, you must decide what to do with this knowledge. Do you use it to protect yourself while remaining ethically grounded? Do you adopt these techniques for your own advancement? Or do you pretend you never learned any of this and return to being unconsciously influenced by those who have no such reservations. This is the crossroads every person reaches when they glimpse behind the curtain of human influence. You cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot unsee what you have seen. The question is whether you'll use this awareness to become more authentically powerful or simply more sophisticated in your own manipulations. The path of authentic power means learning to influence through genuine value, real wisdom, and honest connection. It means developing the ability to inspire rather than manipulate, to guide rather than control, to create willing followers rather than unconscious victims. This path is harder because it requires you to actually become worthy of the influence you seek, rather than simply skilled at extracting it. But it's also the only path that leads to lasting satisfaction. Because influence built on manipulation always requires more manipulation to maintain. It creates relationships based on deception, success based on exploitation, and power based on the continued unconsciousness of others. It's a house of cards that demands constant vigilance to prevent collapse. True power, the kind that Machiavelli would ultimately respect, comes from becoming someone that others genuinely want to follow. Not because they've been psychologically programmed to do so, but because they recognize authentic strength, real wisdom, and genuine care for their well-being. This kind of influence doesn't require tricks or techniques. It emerges naturally from who you are. The silent mind game will always exist. There will always be people who choose manipulation over authenticity, control over connection, exploitation over service. But now you know how to recognize them. You understand their methods. You can see through their techniques. And most importantly, you can choose a different path. The question isn't whether you'll encounter these psychological manipulators. You will. The question is whether you'll be their victim, their competitor, or something far more powerful. Someone who has transcended the need to play their game at all. Someone who influences through presence rather than pressure, who leads through inspiration rather than manipulation, who succeeds through authentic value rather than psychological exploitation. This is the ultimate victory over the silent mind game. Not to beat the manipulators at their own game, but to render their game irrelevant through the development of something they can never manipulate, genuine personal power based on truth, integrity, and authentic strength. When you become this person, the psychological games of others lose their power over you entirely. You become untouchable, not through defense, but through transcendence. The choice is yours. The game is real. The players are all around you. But now you know the rules. Now you can see the board. Now you understand that the most powerful move isn't to play better than everyone else. It's to become the kind of person who doesn't need to play at all.